Tasha Williams had worked hard for everything she had. At 42 years old, she was proud of her home, a beautiful two-story house in Chandler, Arizona, with a backyard that represented her greatest personal achievement. It was not just a house, it was the result of years of sacrifice, effort, and smart decisions. But her true pride was the crystal-clear pool in the center of the yard, impeccably maintained, surrounded by palm trees and elegant furniture. For her, that space was a refuge, her private sanctuary. The neighborhood she lived in was quiet, mostly families and longtime homeowners. Some neighbors were friendly, others preferred distance, and Tasha did not mind either way. She was not looking to be the most beloved or the most popular in the community. She only wanted to live in peace, enjoy what she had built, and have the reassurance that her home was her safe space. However, that peace would not last long. What began as a simple nuisance soon turned into a blatant invasion. One day, upon returning from shopping, she noticed something strange in her backyard. Wet footprints, a towel thrown over the fence, and a lower water level in her pool. Her stomach tightened. Someone had been there. And the worst part was that it would not be the last time. It seemed unbelievable to think that after so much effort and dedication, someone could invade another person's personal space without the slightest respect. But Tasha would soon discover that when people see something they want, they rarely stop to consider boundaries. The first time she found wet footprints in her backyard, she tried not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was a mistake, an accident, someone who had the wrong house. But when she saw the abandoned towel on her fence and an empty can on her lounge chair, she knew it wasn't just a coincidence. Someone had been in her pool, enjoying what she had worked so hard to build without permission. She tried to handle the situation calmly. She asked her neighbors, hoping that maybe someone would offer an explanation. However, instead of concern, she found indifference. "They're just kids, it's not a big deal," a woman said with a careless laugh. Another neighbor, without even looking up, muttered, "You have a nice pool." People notice. The responses left her stunned. Not only did no one seem alarmed, but they were almost telling her to accept it as normal. But Tasha was not the kind of person who let others walk all over her. She had worked too hard for her home and her peace. So she reinforced the lock on her backyard gate, thinking that would be enough. However, a week later, the unmistakable sound of laughter and splashing pulled her out of her thoughts. She rushed to her window and saw the unthinkable. A teenage boy was casually swimming in her pool while his sister cooled off at the edge. The audacity was absolute. With her heart pounding, she stormed into the yard and confronted them. The kids looked startled, but not remorseful. "We didn't think you'd mind," the boy stammered before running off. And that was when Tasha realized the truth. It wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. To these people, her space wasn't hers. It was an opportunity they could take advantage of. Tasha thought that after catching the teenagers in her pool, the message would be clear. But she was wrong. The indifference in their reactions, the lack of sincere apologies, and the attitude of the neighbors made her realize something even more unsettling. They did not respect her. To them, her home wasn't private property, but just another space they could use whenever they pleased. And if the first invasion was bold, what happened next proved that it was no longer just about mischievous kids. It was blatant abuse. The first few weeks after the incident seemed quiet. The new lock on her back gate gave her a false sense of control, and the security cameras, though not sophisticated, provided some peace of mind. But the calm didn't last. One afternoon, returning from a shopping trip, Tasha noticed that her side gate was slightly open. Her stomach tightened. She rushed to the backyard, and what she saw left her speechless. It wasn't just a couple of teenagers this time. Her backyard was full of people. Not strangers, but neighbors, adults and children alike, as if it were a family gathering in her own home. Towels were spread across her chairs, beer bottles sat on her table, and worst of all, her pool was packed with people laughing and swimming like it was a public facility. Then, her eyes met Sandra's, the woman who lived a few houses down and had never done more than offer a forced smile in passing. Now, without the slightest hint of shame, she waved at Tasha and called out, "Hope you don't mind. With this heat, we all just wanted to cool off a bit." Her tone was light, almost as if she were thanking Tasha for her hospitality. But Tasha wasn't their host, and this wasn't an invitation. It was an invasion. Her heart pounded with fury, but she forced herself to stay calm. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and spoke firmly, leaving no room for doubt. "All of you, out, now." An awkward silence spread through the group. Some exchanged glances, others shrugged as if she were overreacting. Sandra even sighed with annoyance and replied, "Come on, Tasha, don't be so dramatic. It's just water." And that was when she understood. It wasn't just about trespassing. It was about a complete lack of respect. And if they didn't understand boundaries with words, she would find another way to ensure they never tried this again. Tasha thought that after catching the teenagers in her pool, the message would have been clear. But she was wrong. The indifference with which they had left, the lack of sincere apologies, and the attitude of the neighbors made her realize something even more unsettling. They did not respect her. To them, her home was not a private place, but merely an accessible space whenever it suited them. And if the first invasion had been audacious, what happened next made it clear that it was no longer just mischievous kids, but outright abuse. The first few weeks after the incident seemed quiet. The new lock on the back gate gave her a false sense of control, and the security cameras, though not sophisticated, provided some peace of mind. But the calm didn't last. One afternoon, upon returning from shopping, Tasha noticed that the side gate to her yard was slightly open. Her stomach tensed. She rushed to the back of the house, and what she saw left her speechless. It wasn't just a couple of teenagers this time. Her backyard was full of people. Not strangers, but neighbors, adults and children alike, as if it were a family gathering in her own house. Towels were spread out on her chairs, beer bottles sat on her table, and worst of all, her pool was packed with people swimming and laughing as if it were a public facility. Then her eyes met Sandra's, the woman who lived a few houses down and who had never done more than greet her with a forced smile. Now, without the slightest hint of shame, she waved at Tasha and called out, "Hope you don't mind. With this heat, we all just wanted to cool off a bit." Her tone was light, almost as if she were thanking Tasha for her hospitality. But Tasha was not their host. And this was not an invitation. It was an invasion. Her heart pounded with fury, but she forced herself to stay calm. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and spoke in a firm voice, leaving no room for doubt. "All of you, out. Right now." An uncomfortable silence spread through the group. Some exchanged glances, others shrugged as if she were overreacting. Sandra even sighed in annoyance and responded, "Come on, Tasha, don't be so dramatic. It's just water." And that was when she understood. It wasn't just about trespassing. It was about a complete lack of respect. And if they didn't understand boundaries with words, she would find another way to ensure they never tried this again. When Tasha thought the situation couldn't get any worse, reality hit her with a devastating force. After Sandra and her neighbor's blatant audacity, she reinforced her backyard security even further. She bought stronger locks, adjusted the security cameras, and made it very clear to the neighborhood that her pool was not for public use. But deep down, an unsettling feeling lingered. Had they really understood the message? Or were they simply waiting for the next opportunity to cross the line again? She didn't have to wait long for her answer. It was a scorching Saturday when Tasha returned home after a long day at work. From the street, something felt off. A vibration in the air, the murmur of voices, distant music. As she approached her entrance, she saw something that left her completely frozen. Her side gate was wide open, and inside, a scene unfolded that defied all logic. Her backyard had been turned into the epicenter of a party. But not just a small, quiet gathering. No, this was a full-scale event. Dozens of people were scattered across her yard, chatting, drinking, and laughing. Some were in the pool, splashing around with complete confidence, as if they had rented a private resort. Others lounged on her chairs, basking in the sun without a care in the world. There was even a table with food and drinks, as if someone had the audacity to set up a full buffet on her property. The audacity was so overwhelming that for a moment Tasha was left breathless. She looked around, expecting to see at least one person showing a hint of embarrassment. But no one seemed to notice her presence, or worse, they didn't care. Then her eyes locked onto Sandra. The woman was in the pool, drink in hand, looking completely relaxed as she enjoyed the cool water. When she saw Tasha, her face barely registered surprise. Instead, she smiled with the same shameless attitude as before and raised a hand in a casual wave. "Tasha, hope you don't mind. It was so hot we figured we'd enjoy the pool." The sheer nerve was the spark that ignited the flame. Tasha stepped forward without hesitation, her fists clenched, her voice as sharp as a blade. "Get out of my property, right now," she thundered, making a few people turn toward her in discomfort. A silence spread through the yard. Some people exchanged glances, weighing whether they should actually take her seriously. Sandra, however, scoffed and rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, don't make a big deal out of this. We're just enjoying the day. It's not that serious." That phrase was the final straw. Without another word, Tasha walked straight to the pool's control panel and turned off the filter. Then, she unplugged the power feeding the speakers. The party's lively atmosphere crumbled in an instant. But she wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and dialed with precision. "I'm calling the police." Panic was immediate. A tense murmur swept through the yard as people began moving hastily. Empty cups were set down, towels were grabbed from chairs, and conversations dropped to whispers. No one wanted to be there when the police arrived. Within minutes, the yard was empty. Even Sandra, despite her usual defiant attitude, had no choice but to gather her things and leave. But not before throwing one last spiteful comment. "You're way too dramatic, Tasha. This is why no one wants to socialize with you." Tasha watched her go, not bothering to respond, because in that moment, something crystallized inside her. It didn't matter what they said. It didn't matter if they called her dramatic or antisocial. What mattered was that these people had no respect for her or her home. And if words hadn't been enough to stop them, it was clear she would have to take more drastic measures. That night, Tasha couldn't sleep. Despite having kicked the intruders out of her property, the anger still burned inside her. It wasn't just about the invasion of her home, but the blatant disrespect with which they had treated her. They didn't see her as the homeowner, but as a minor obstacle in their way, someone to ignore, until she gave up. But what they didn't know was that Tasha didn't give up easily. She sat at her kitchen table, turned on her computer, and started planning her next move. She had tried to be reasonable, had spoken with the neighbors, installed security cameras, reinforced her gate. Nothing had worked. Now, the only option was to go on the offensive. First, she made sure her property was completely protected. She bought a new high-security lock for the side gate and an alarm system that would send her a notification if anyone tried to enter her yard without permission. She also adjusted her camera settings so they would automatically send recordings to her email in case of suspicious activity. Then, she addressed the biggest problem, the pool. She knew that the temptation of cool, crystal-clear water was what made her neighbors feel entitled to invade her home. So she decided to give them a lesson they wouldn't forget. While searching online, she found the perfect solution, a special chemical used in public pools that detects urine and stains the water a bright color upon contact. It wasn't dangerous or harmful, but she didn't stop there. To ensure the message was, "Notice, this pool has been treated with a special chemical that reacts upon contact with the body. It may cause irritation, rashes, and temporary skin discoloration. Unauthorized entry is prohibited." It was a lie, of course, but the truth wasn't the point. The psychological impact was. The next morning, Tasha sat on her terrace with a cup of coffee and waited. It didn't take long before she spotted a couple of teenagers walking along the sidewalk and stopping in front of her house. They read the sign, exchanged looks, and walked away without saying a word. Smiling to herself, Tasha knew her plan was working. But the real test came that same afternoon. From her window, she saw Sandra walking her dog. As usual, the woman couldn't resist meddling in other people's business. She stopped in front of the fence, squinted to read the sign, and immediately took out her phone. A few minutes later, Tasha checked the neighborhood's Facebook group and found Sandra's post. "Attention neighbors, it looks like Tasha put dangerous chemicals in her pool. Does anyone know if this is even legal?" The comments flooded in quickly. Some were concerned, others criticized her for being extreme. But the most important thing was that the information had spread. Her neighbors no longer saw her pool as a free oasis. Now, they saw it as a risk that wasn't worth taking. But Tasha wasn't satisfied with just deterring them. She wanted to make sure the lesson was permanently engraved in their minds. So, she added one last security measure: a motion-activated sprinkler system. If anyone tried to climb over the fence, they would be met with a blast of cold water in the middle of the night. In the following weeks, her home became forbidden territory. No one attempted to enter again. The murmurs in the neighborhood faded little by little. For the first time in months, her backyard was hers and hers alone. But the best part? She never even had to call the police. Because in the end, the only language those people understood was the language of consequences. The change in the neighborhood was immediate. Just hours after Sandra posted her message in the Facebook group, rumors started spreading. Neighbors whispered as they passed by Tasha's house. Some cast furtive glances, others crossed the street to avoid her yard. But Tasha didn't care. On the contrary, she enjoyed watching how, for the first time in months, her property was being respected. For days, no one dared to come near. The children stopped running alongside her fence, the teenagers disappeared, and the families who used her yard as a shortcut took longer routes. But not everyone was willing to accept it. One afternoon, while Tasha was watering her plants, she saw Sandra and two of her friends watching her from the sidewalk. It didn't take long before they approached. "Tasha, we need to talk," Sandra said, arms crossed. Tasha turned off the hose and looked at her calmly. "About what?" "We know what you're doing," another woman chimed in. "Putting dangerous chemicals in the pool is irresponsible. It could harm children, pets." Tasha smiled with amusement. "Funny. When you were using my pool without permission, no one seemed to care." Sandra scoffed, exasperated. "No one was harming anything. We just wanted to cool off. Why go to such lengths?" Tasha crossed her arms. "First, you trespassed without permission. Then when I asked you to stop, you ignored me. After that, you threw a party in my yard. And now that I took action, suddenly, I'm the problem?" The women exchanged uncomfortable glances. "You don't have to be so hostile," Sandra finally muttered. "We just want a neighborhood where we all get along." Tasha let out a laugh. "No, Sandra. What you want is to keep taking advantage of me. But that's over." The women stood in silence for a few seconds before giving up. Without another argument, they walked away, murmuring among themselves. Tasha watched them leave with a satisfied smile. That was the last time anyone tried to confront her. Over time, things in the neighborhood settled down. Although some still looked at her with suspicion, most simply left her alone. No one else tried to jump her fence or organize casual gatherings in her yard. Finally, Tasha had reclaimed her home, without calling the police or engaging in major confrontations, just with intelligence and well-defined boundaries. Because sometimes, people only understand respect when you demand it. The final confrontation didn't take long to arrive. Although most of the neighbors had understood the message and kept their distance from Tasha's property, Sandra wasn't ready to give up so easily. The frustration of no longer being able to use the pool at her convenience burned inside her. And as if things couldn't get worse, every time she passed by Tasha's house, she saw the warning sign about the pool chemicals. She knew it was probably an exaggeration, but she couldn't stand the fact that her neighbor had taken control of the situation. One afternoon, while Tasha was enjoying the peace of her backyard, a loud knock on the front door shattered the tranquility. She got up calmly, but when she looked through the peephole and saw Sandra's hardened expression, she knew this conversation would be different. She opened the door without hurry. "What do you need, Sandra?" Sandra stepped in uninvited, crossing her arms with a defiant look. "Enough, Tasha. The whole neighborhood is talking about you. People think you're overreacting, that you did all of this just to get attention." Tasha leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Get attention? That's interesting. Last time I checked, I wasn't the one who threw a party on someone else's property without permission." Sandra scoffed. "It was just a gathering. No one stole anything. No one damaged your house. But you decided to make a scene, and now everyone thinks you're the bitter neighbor." Tasha let out an incredulous laugh. "Let me see if I understand. You all trespassed into my home, used my pool, drank in my yard, left trash on my property, and when I asked you to leave, you ignored me. And now I'm the problem because I set boundaries? Is that it? Sandra didn't respond immediately. Her mouth opened and closed as if searching for the right words, but none came. Look, I don't want this to turn into a war between neighbors, she finally said, softening her tone. I'm just saying that if you were a little friendlier, maybe people wouldn't see you as a threat. Tasha stared at her for a moment before answering. I don't care how they see me, Sandra. The only thing I care about is that they respect my property, and if that makes me the bitter neighbor, so be it. Sandra huffed and shook her head in disbelief. You're impossible? She snapped before turning on her heels and walking away. Tasha calmly shut the door, feeling an undeniable satisfaction. She didn't need to yell or argue to command respect. The simple truth was this: people will always try to take what doesn't belong to them until someone forces them to stop. And in her neighborhood, there was no longer any doubt that she was not someone to be messed with. After the confrontation with Sandra, something changed in the neighborhood. It wasn't immediate, but as the days passed, Tasha noticed a palpable difference. No one else tried to approach her property. No more wet footprints near the fence, no more suspicious noises in her backyard, no more shameless laughter floating over her pool without her permission. For the first time in months, her home once again felt like what it was always meant to be, her sanctuary. The looks in the street changed as well. Some neighbors avoided her completely, lowering their gaze when they walked past her house. Others, especially those who had never trespassed, greeted her with a slight nod, as if they finally understood that she had only been defending what was hers. And then there were those, like Sandra, who still couldn't accept their defeat. But even though the former leader of the intruders tried to pretend that nothing had changed, the reality was that neither she, her kids, nor her friends ever dared to cross that fence again. The warning sign about the chemicals remained intact, a constant reminder to everyone that the rules had changed. But more than that, the real barrier was Tasha's attitude. She was no longer the quiet neighbor who tried to reason with people who refused to listen. Now, everyone knew that if someone dared to challenge her boundaries again, there would be no second chances. One Saturday afternoon, while enjoying a cup of coffee in her backyard, Tasha saw Sandra walking her dog on the other side of the street. This time, the woman didn't say a word, didn't even glance in her direction. Smiling to herself, Tasha leaned back in her chair, savoring the peace she had fought so hard to reclaim. She hadn't needed yelling, endless fights, or even calling the police. She had only needed to show that she owned her space and that she would no longer let anyone take it for granted. And so, without further interruptions or disturbances, she finally enjoyed her home exactly as she had always wanted. At the end of the day, the lesson was clear for everyone in the neighborhood. There are some people you don't mess with, and Tasha Williams was one of them. What Tasha learned from this entire experience wasn't just about nosy neighbors or private property. It was about respect and how far people will go when they think they can take advantage of someone else. For too long, she had tried to be patient, to find peaceful solutions, and to make others understand that what they were doing was wrong. But in the end, the only way to make them respect her was by setting boundaries in a way no one could ignore. It wasn't about being rude or making enemies. She had never intended to become the difficult neighbor of the neighborhood. But when people get used to crossing boundaries without consequences, they start to believe they have the right to do so. And the only way to make them understand is by proving that they can't. The question is, what would you have done in her place? Would you have kept ignoring the situation, hoping people would respect your space on their own? Or, like Tasha, would you have taken control and put a stop to it once and for all? Put yourself in her shoes and choose. If you think the best option is to ignore it and let it go, comment 1. If you would have reacted like Tasha and defended your space, comment 2. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will make you reflect and discover the true meaning of justice and respect. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next story filled with emotion and insight.